Good afternoon. This is Anita from Artworks by Anita, and today I'd like to visit with you about watercolors, the basics, what to use in the beginning as you're starting out wanting to learn more about painting with watercolors. I'm going to go through the basics and keep it simple, I suggest. The more you have, the more you have to try to figure out how to handle. So keeping things simple in the beginning will certainly help you learn painting with watercolors. So I'm going to talk about supplies. First of all, buy the best that you can afford, okay? And that doesn't mean money necessarily. What I'm talking about is quality. And yes, quality is going to cost you a little bit more than the cheap, inexpensive products. I had a gal in not too long ago that did practice with me a little bit painting, and then she went to buy her own paints and bought very inexpensive things, and she was quite unhappy with it. So start out in the beginning using good quality supplies, and you will be so much happier. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to talk about paints. There are so many wonderful paint brands out there. First and foremost, buy one that has artist quality or professional quality. Here it says artist watercolor, so it's a more of a professional. It has finer, pure pigments in it rather than a binder. I prefer, and I've always used Holbein, which is a popular brand. Just an excellent paint. I think the colors are vivid and bright. All of them seem to be quite transparent. I'm quite happy with Holbein. I've also used Winsor & Newton. Excellent brand as well. Daniel Smith, I've used from time to time. Also a great brand. Van Gogh, I took a workshop with a gal and she only used Van Gogh. Another excellent brand. This one I won in a contest, in a competition. Mayberry Blue, and they're I've just used them a couple of times. People say that that's a good paint as well. Here is a very inexpensive paint. It's called a Marie's, and they are just very inexpensive. I would suggest maybe for younger people, students, perhaps these might be good. I have a whole box, I think, of 18, and they only cost, like $5 or something, so quite inexpensive. I was sent a couple tubes of the Graham Company watercolors, and these have honey in them, so they do stay moist, and another excellent brand. So read the descriptions of your paints and look for those qualities. Light, fast, vivid, transparent. They aren't going to fade, things like that. So, yep, that's it about paints. I can show you my palette and the colors that I use. Here I have a color it's called Aurelian or Aureolin, however you pronounce it. It's Aureolin. And it is a transparent yellow, a wonderful yellow. Next, I have a cadmium red. And I use this often when I'm painting barns. It just has that richer red color that sometimes we find on farm buildings. I don't use it a lot. The cadmium colors are more opaque, and I don't use it a lot. I use yellow ochre a lot. I have a tendency to use more nature's colors, and I use that a lot. Here is Rose Madder, a beautiful, beautiful kind of a burgundy red, lovely color. This is cherry red, which is a quinacridone red. Reds are, I've always found, be kind of tough. It's been kind of hard to find a good red. But this is the one that I've kind of settled on, cherry red. Here I have a burnt umber, which is kind of a rusty-ish brown. This is a cad orange that I used for a recent piece. Neutral tint. Neutral tint is a great way to darken a paint. For instance, if I want to darken a green, it's not going to change the properties or the qualities or anything about it. It just makes it darker. Now, you can't use it with yellows or oranges or reds or anything like that, but it can make a green look darker, your blues, the browns and whatever. And you can use it on its own, but I use it more for darkening a color. This is my Grumbacher Hooker's Green. I like this green. It's a transparent green, and it mixes well with, for instance, a brown or a burnt sienna for grassy areas. And it also mixes well with ultramarine blues and waters and grasses and things like that. I love Mineral Violet. It's very expensive, but I don't use a lot of it. But it is a beautiful, rich violet color. Everybody probably should have Cobalt Blue. It's a transparent blue. Transparent, it's going to let the light, the white of the paper underneath or whatever is underneath to kind of shine through. Very good with mixing colors. Probably one of my favorite, all-time favorite blues, ultramarine blue. It's a sedimentary paint. In other words, you paint it and it'll have a tendency to settle down into the tooth or the low valleys of your paper. And I like that. I don't know what that one is right now. Oh, a beautiful blue is Antwerp Blue. I love the greens in mixing Antwerp and the Aureolin. They make beautiful greens. Cerulean Blue is an opaque blue, but boy, it's an amazing color to use, especially in skies and waters and other things. Brown, I'm always using brown. This is umber, or sometimes I use a Van Dyke brown, and I use those a lot because I paint a lot of nature. And of course the burnt sienna, I use that a lot as well. I think these would be really good ones to start out with. The Aureolin, the yellow ochre, a cherry red, a green, Hooker's Green. You can always make your violets, but a cobalt blue, an ultramarine blue, an umber, and a burnt sienna. I think those would be great ones to start out with. And as long as I have my palette out here, I thought I might just talk about that a little bit. Palettes, oh gosh, there's so many different kinds. There's small and there's large ones. I would say if you're going to paint large pieces, you're going to need large palette because you need large mixing areas to make up large puddles to cover a wider amount of space. This one is a plastic one, and in fact, 100 years ago, I ordered something from Cheap Joe's Art Supply down in the Carolinas, and this was sent free for ordering with them. And it has busted in a couple places, and I've taped it back together, but I really like this. I do have another one that I brought to show. This is a bigger one, and I have used it. But what I don't like, if I mix a puddle here, it can have a tendency to run down into these little cubbies. And so I really don't like this. It's nice to section out the paint. It has a lot more holes for that. And then it does have some mixing areas on the lid. But, and then if I should happen to tilt it a little bit, things would just kind of run out. So I don't use this one very much anymore. So that's why I like this one. It just keeps everything combined. Nothing's running together. Now, this is what I do. I kind of have my warmer colors on one side and then the cooler on the other side. Every once in a while, I will change my palette. I will change the colors. What I like to do is kind of label them. I know them by heart by now, but what I've done is I've taken tape and I've write the names of them around the edges. But I really know them by heart and don't need to do that anymore. Unless the blues, if I forget or I change blues, I might label it a little more. Also, there's the pan paints. You know, this is a very simple praying one. Now, praying is a good one. It's semi-moist, and look, it says professional on it. I had a gal come to class one time. You know, most people have big palettes and all the tubes and everything, and she came with a little pan palette like this, and she did wonderful, wonderful watercolors with it. These are great paints. I use these a lot if I go out on a plein air to work outside. Also, she's limited here. She was, or anybody who uses this is limited. And you learn how to create, how you mix to get the different colors that you need, which is a plus, I think. So now here, you know, you're digging right into the thing. You have little mixing areas that you can mix up a color or a large puddle if you're going to be painting a larger space or whatever. What I like to do, I like to hang the original color on the edge. And this is just, I don't think I've ever seen any other artist do it. But I hang a glob of the paint on the edge so that I have a fresh dose of original color. Once I get painting, sometimes I take my blue brush and I'll dip right into the yellow. And I don't want to mess up all my yellow. Ahead of time, I will go and I will make kind of a puddle in there that's a consistency of cream. It's ready to go. It's instant, ready to go. And it takes me about 15-20 minutes ahead of time. It's kind of like meditation, a warm-up to painting. But I don't want to have to go in and try and rejuvenate or, you know, work up a hard lump of paint to get what I need to paint. That slows you down. That kind of stops that creativity flow. So once I have these little puddles all made up in there, it's ready to go. And these are my large mixing areas. I also have a lid, and it had two large ones. And I took spacers here that I use for framing and put them in there with some hot glue. And so I have 3 smaller mixing areas. And this, I tried hot glue, but it kind of spread out a little bit. But I did make some more mixing areas. And those are really important too. So, and this is plastic. A lot of people swear by metal or porcelain in particular. But I like this size too. It's kind of a medium size. And I can work with larger paintings with this and small as well. I do have a very, very small palette that I did also win in a competition, and it's a Sennelier, and this is what I will use if I go out on site in particular. It has a little mixing areas here, and I can hold it with one hand. It does have the colors and how they look up here, and they're very strong, very rich pigments. And I like this especially too to use with my sketchbook instead, my journaling. Instead of getting out my large palette, I'll have a tendency to use this. And it folds up very nicely, and that's really a nice little thing to use too. Okay. Let's see, enough about paints. Let's talk about brushes. These are the brushes that I use, and I do like round brushes, but I won a set of squares, and so I primarily use squares now. But let's go through these. I do like a number 4 pencil brush. It is a nice size brush, especially for details, and so I do like a number 4. And this brand is the Soft Grip Royal, and I won this as a gift. So these beautiful soft grip brushes, and it's really a great brush. A number 4. This one is a Creative Mark. And it's a 6 round. That is a lovely brush. A wonderful, wonderful point. This is a number 12, Robert Simmons. When I first started out, I did use a lot of Robert Simmons. I really do like it. I like the spring that's in it. A lot of brushes, especially the real hair brushes, they're very floppy, and I like a spring to a brush. It springs back very nicely, and that tip stays there for a long, long time. I think this one is a number 10. This one is a number 2. Robert Simmons. Love, love, love. Another round that I have, it's a Richardson, and I love this one as well. This body up here, I mean, it will hold a lot of paint. It will hold a lot of water, but it really does come to a nice point as well, and I can do very fine line painting with this big brush, and this is a Richardson 20. These are the squares that I have that I use all the time. I just really like squares. Almost prefer them to the rounds. And here, oh gosh, I've worn this off. This is a 10. This is a 3/4. And I think this is a 1/2 inch. So anyway, squares are wonderful. You know, you can make broad strokes and cover a lot more area than you can with a round, and you can use the straight edge to make lines or edges of trees or whatever. Very nice brushes. Also, you will need what I call a rigger or a script liner. Now, these have long hairs. You can see some script liners that are just very short. The thing is, if you want to paint a grass or a telephone wire or something, you know, these will, you know, last a long time and carry a lot of paint in them. Whereas the real short-haired ones, you get about halfway up and you've run out of paint or you've run out of water. So always a script liner, a rigger. This one I've used so much that the paint's come off, and I'm sure this was a Happy Strokes from Cheap Joe's. So riggers are very, very important. I also have a wash brush. I have a couple wash brushes. And I use these if I want to cover my paper with water to start a wash, or if I want to fill in a large area or a sky. I don't usually add a lot of color using these brushes, but these hold a lot of water to cover large areas, and really very important. Also, a couple of things. I do use an old toothbrush for spattering, and I'm always using these. I also do have like a fan brush. Now this is a bristle one, which I really like for grasses. So those are what I suggest. If you're just beginning, I suggest a number 4, maybe another 10 or 12. And then I would suggest probably a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch, and then a wash brush, and then a rigger or a script liner. That's what I would start to begin with if you're purchasing brushes. Again, there's very expensive ones out there, hundreds of dollars, but there's also ones that are very inexpensive, and once you get them home and get kind of the crust off of them, they're no longer in a point, and they lose hairs a lot. So, you know, again, look at the good brands, read the descriptions, and buy the best that you can afford, okay? I've even seen where some artists are using a pencil right now that costs $25 to $30 for a pencil. So that's not really necessary. These are, well, my pencils are all about this size. I like to use an HB, which is kind of just a medium value. And that's for sketching and getting things laid out. I don't like to use a lot of this, but, and here's a 4H, and a 4H is very light. So if I just want to put some light pencil sketches on, you know, that will definitely be removed easily later, I use this. And this HB is a little darker, and sometimes I need that rather than a lighter one. A good eraser, now this is called a kneaded eraser, and it's not clay, but it is, looks like it. And what it does is it picks up the graphite, and as it gets used, it'll get darker and darker, and not quite as soft, and that means that it is full of graphite. But there are no crumbs. You erase something, and you know, we think that we will be brushing away crumbs with a regular eraser. Not with this. It's soft and gentle to your paper surface, especially with watercolor paper. You don't want to disturb that surface too much, and this works just great. I also like these little erasers. I like it because they come to a point, and I can get in fine areas, and or if I can turn it on its side and erase. I got these at Hobby Lobby, and there's a package of maybe like 10 of them, and they're really nice and soft, non-abrasive. I really like those as well. Water bottles. I have 3 different kinds here. This one it's an old Hairspray one, but it has just the finest mist. And if I want to get some water into an area, but I don't want it to have droplets or holes in it or whatever, I will use this. It's just a nice mister. This one I like because it offers a continuous spray. So if I want to, for instance, rejuvenate, I can just come in and spray and push it down, and it's continuous. And I pump it like that. I think this was a hair salon that used to use these. And then I have this one. And this one, I took a class from the very famous Nita Engel. And she loved the Windex spray bottles, the pumps. You know, you don't see the pumps anymore. You see the trigger ones. Well, when I took her class, Denny, the manager of Dillman's, looked all over for the Windex pump, and then just a inexpensive bottle. But Nita liked it because it would create these large drops, and I love this because exactly like she says, it adds a lot of texture. If I paint something and it's still wet, I get kind of from a distance and I drop this water on there, and it creates a lot of texture in it that probably people don't notice, but you would notice the difference if I put something side by side. After I've painted with my palette, what I have a tendency to do is I will take a small sponge, wet it, I will lay it in here, and then I will put the lid on it, and that will keep everything moist until I come next time. So otherwise things would probably dry out pretty fast. Let's see. When I am painting, I like to kind of clean off my brush a little bit. I'll dip it into the water, and if it has too much, I like to just run it across this sponge. This sponge was round. I found it that way, and this is just a yogurt thing, and I like to wipe it off. However, around my board, you can see, I think you can see, I have a towel. And a lot of the times I will just find myself wiping my brush off on this towel, which is very quick and very responsive to me working quickly. So both of those things I do like. My water, I use a jug, and I'm hesitant to show you because right now it is really, I just finished painting and it's really, really dirty. But this is what I use here in the studio. When I go out, I have something quite different and smaller. But here, I just have an old milk jug that I've cut down with a handle, and I like that very much. It has a large opening, so I don't have to try and focus in on it, but it works very well. Kleenex is very important. Kleenex is a brand. I guess I should say tissues, but tissues is a way to lift paint very softly, and it's just nice to be able to lift what you've painted away, and it is very soft around the edges where you've lifted. Viva paper towels, I swear by. I love them. They're very, very soft, and also if I'm going to be lifting anything, it doesn't leave an imprint on the paper. I ask that my students in the workshop use Vivas. I also just have a cheap, very inexpensive paper towel to clean up the palettes, to clean up your table or whatever. So I usually have that on hand as well. If I'm using a masking tape to tape anything down, I use a white masking tape. I like it. You know, we have the other tapes. We have, you know, the painter's tape. We have the ugly masking tape, but I really do like this tape if I'm taping my watercolor paper down. It isn't, the blue can kind of confuse me with colors when I'm painting, but this is just like the paper, and so it's like an extension of the paper, so I do like it. It is a masking tape, but it is a white masking tape, so I like that. If you don't already know, I do like to staple my paper down to my board, and I really like this board that I have here. It's called a Gator Board. This board has kind of a paper-like coating on it. It has the styrofoam in the middle. This is a waterproof covering. Styrofoam in the middle and the same on the other side. Very lightweight. In the early days, we were carrying around masonite and plywood boards, and those were very, very heavy, and these are just amazing. I have them to accommodate half a sheet of watercolor paper, full sheets of watercolor paper, and here, of course, I can put a quarter sheet or less. And I can either with this, I can either staple or use my white masking tape. I did do a video about stretching watercolor paper, and that's on my YouTube channel, so you're welcome to watch that sometime. Gosh, I don't know if there's, I think I've covered about everything. If you view this and you have some, a hair dryer is a must. A hair dryer is a must because there's times when you have to dry things before you can move on. And if you have to sit around and wait for that to dry, then it could take a very long time for your painting to be finished. You know, and I think those are the basics. I could go into a lot more about other stuff, but I think that's about it as far as supplies. I do suggest that once you get your paints, that you play around with them. And here is something that I did. These are my colors that I use: the yellow ochre, burnt sienna, burnt umber, my hooker's green, you know, cobalt, ultramarine, that one, anthraquick, whatever, Antwerp umber. So that goes right around my my palette. Here I've done some mixing, the hookers and the yellow ochre. Hookers and the burnt sienna. Look at those wonderful colors. Hookers and my ultramarine blue. Look, oh, beautiful. And so on. So play around with your colors. They look great in the palette, but find out what they look like on a white piece of paper. Here's the blues that I have. Far too many blues. Far too many. One time I was going to paint, you know, like Okoboji water and boats and whatever, and I thought, okay, what blue am I going to use? And I thought about it probably for 10 minutes. And my goodness, that's too long. Less colors, I can mix on my own or whatever. but this is way too many blues. So keep it simple, like I said. Here I've taken the colors from my palette, and I've done a bunch of mixing to make different greens. Look at all those different greens. And I wrote here on the side how I got these particular greens. So once you get your paints, your brushes, and your papers, play around a little bit. As far as papers, again, in that tutorial about stretching paper, I talk about the papers that I use. I do love Arches watercolor paper. I use 140 pound cold press. And that is kind of a medium tooth, medium texture. There is hot press, which is very smooth, very flat. And then there is rough, which is rough. Another one that I like to use, paper, is the Aristico Fabriano Aristico. And this happens to be a tablet. I really do like this paper. With this paper, you can wipe away color very, very easily. You can wipe out things, boards and fences and branches, very easily with this paper. The paper doesn't soak down, the paints don't soak down in the paper so much and stay a little bit more on the surface. But it's much responsive as the Arches. Arches is a tough paper. It's used probably by, I would say, 90% of the artists in this country. So anyway, if you view this and you have some questions, feel free to contact me. I'd be glad to visit with you. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking your time. And we'll see you again.